Ever since I embarked on this project of getting the idea out of Vacchiano's rules and using them as a basis for further development of strictures to be used in trumpet teaching, the trumpet commentariat, especially Vacchiano students or the students of Vacchiano students, have made it clear that they've never heard of some of these rules, or they never heard of the rules at all. This is quite understandable because there are at least three possible reasons or plausible reasons for this to be the case. I think the first reason would be that Vacchiano, as opposed to the way people teach today, taught according to what is commonly referred to as the Schlossberg model. Jimmy Stamp was another one who taught according to this model, and that was this: each student has his assets or his or her liabilities, and the best way to teach is to teach and address those liabilities. That it's a waste of time to do the things that the students are already able to do just as a matter of course in order to follow some silly curriculum requirement or some personal view of the teacher, just for the sake of expounding on that particular matter or training in that particular matter. If there's something a student can already do, go on to the next thing. In my own case, on those very, very rare occasions when I managed to do something well, I would never get more than 8 or 9 measures into the piece when he would take the music away and say, "You already know how to do this, let's do something you can't do. I'm not interested in listening to a trumpet recital." It was not comfortable being a Vacchiano student because we rarely, if ever, played anything for him twice. He wanted to move us quickly. But we were not supposed to be comfortable. As Zubin Mehta often opined, we're not in the comfort business. We're trying to get work done. I'll give an example of that philosophy. Take the idea of transposition, which is important for trumpet players. Most trumpet students are assigned a transposition etude and they come back for the next lesson and play it back to the teacher. This never happened with Vacchiano. Probably 90% of my lessons were sight reading. He would take a piece, for example, in E trumpet transposition, and he would put it up and I would play through it. He would count the number of mistakes I made. And then I was assigned to play that. He would never hear that exercise again. But on a future lesson, maybe the next lesson, maybe the lesson after that, up comes another piece in E transposition. If I had practiced the piece he assigned 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 lessons, 5 lessons before, then I should be able to run right through this. The idea was he wanted us to have a functioning ability to transpose, not to go home and memorize something and then come back and play it to him. He once told me that one of the most difficult things in teaching transposition he had ever encountered was teaching Miles Davis. Because once Miles, because of his very superior all memory, once Miles played it 5 or 6 times, it was locked into his brain, and all he had to figure out was the starting pitch of the new key, and he'd play it right back at him. And he says, we have to learn to be able to play like that guy. We have to learn to be able to try our instruments like that guy. This is quite a compliment from a man who very rarely offered any. The fact that William Vacchiano addressed students' liabilities rather than their assets makes it possible for a student to go through there. And if they already knew how to do certain things, he wouldn't waste anyone's time going through those things again. The best example I have is a student of mine, Rachel Morgan, who studied with me in high school. And I took her through the basic Goldman and Sachs and Werner exercises and taught her those basic rules. And when she went to Juilliard to study with Bill, he tested her out and she knew all those things, so he just moved on to the next level. He wasn't going to put her through those motions just for the sake of putting her through those motions. So it was a very efficient system. You covered more ground, more territory than you would in standard type teaching. But it was not a comfortable way to go, and there was never any feeling of satisfaction on the part of the students of having ever accomplished anything, because he was always pushing you, relentlessly pushing you ahead. The second reason I think students could have gone through and not studied some of those original rules was because by 1970, he was no longer teaching them. Or at least he was not teaching them in the manner that he taught them to my generation. And that was for the obvious reason that the musical landscape had changed, the requirements of trumpet players had changed. Those rules were written for a simpler, earlier time in music when they were dealing with strictly ensemble things and you were playing little short segments of music and always with other people. Since the trumpet had become a legitimate solo and chamber music instrument, had a much more expanded repertoire, you could not any longer use those very restrictive rules. Even though many of the principles involved in those rules were applied, you couldn't teach them in the way that he did. So it's possible that anyone studying after 1970 never saw one rule at all, easily. And the third reason is involves something that one of those, what my old colleague and friend for many years, Roger Bobo, used to call one of those unkind truths. And the best way of expressing that is going back and quoting a very famous horn teacher at a music convention, music educators convention, I think it was in the late 1950s, early 1960s, in which he answered a question as to why he was so inconsistent in the way he taught his various students, that he didn't seem to have a consistent curriculum he was following. And his answer was, well, you know, I made my reputation teaching 50 students, and the other 500 helped pay the mortgage on my house. This is one of those, as Roger would say, unkind truths that is never spoken. But it exists. Many teachers practice their craft in this manner.